With the Iowa caucuses just a few days away, talk has turned to whether smaller candidates should be forming pacts with the leading candidates. Joining us live from the Iowa City is Sky News political reporter Annelise Nielsen. Annelise, why is this such a topic? What's the machinations here for these candidates? What are they weighing up?
Well, it all comes down to the unique qualities of the Iowa caucuses, which we'll be seeing next Monday night here, Tuesday, Australian time. And it's all about these caucuses, how everyone goes into a room just in your local area. There's going to be over 1,000 spots right across the state where you can go, and you literally stand in the corner of who you're supporting. But with the rules, if your candidate has less than 15%, they're considered unviable. So those people standing in those corners then have to move. That's when the jostling begins. You'll see calling out across the room, and you can actually go to undecided if you like as well. So that's the discussion happening in the moment with some of those candidates that are trailing behind, like Andrew Yang, Tom Steyer and Amy Klobuchar. They're being asked what they should tell their supporters to do on the night. Or each of them are saying they're not telling anyone to support people other than themselves, but there's a lot of influence that could happen, not just to go to your supporter, but others as well. It's a really unique factor from the Iowa caucuses. I spoke to Associate Professor of Political Sciences here at the University of Iowa, Tim Hagle, about it, and he says it's a really honest way. It's very open and you get to see exactly who's supporting who.
There is not an ad hoc necessarily, but it's not entirely scripted. And the reason is that you do get this negotiation, some strategizing, saying, okay, we're a not viable group. Let's say the Klobuchar people aren't viable, but also maybe the Steyer people aren't viable. And can the Klobuchar people convince the Steyer people to join them so that they become viable? So you get that negotiation that goes on.
Now, Tom, the Iowa caucuses are pretty interesting. The Iowa caucuses are a pretty interesting beast at the moment. It's really interesting. It's only really eventuated since the 1970s, even though the concept's been around for much longer in smaller venues. But for the concept of the presidential campaign, this has really only resulted from issues that they had with the Vietnam War, and they wanted to have a more open process. But there are concerns that it is a bit outdated, especially going first off in Iowa. Iowa's not a very diverse state. It's almost completely white, also very dominated by rural voters. And so there are concerns that perhaps it shouldn't have the significance that it does. There's also concerns with the way it does happen on a Monday evening at 7 o'clock. A lot of people have trouble getting there, and the turnout can be quite low, between 20 and 30%. But it is open to everyone, a very democratic process, and it seems like it could be modernised in the years to come, perhaps phased out altogether.
In terms of whether it's phased out, it's very possible that, again, we get criticisms in Iowa for a variety of reasons. This time particularly, it's been difficult. One of the criticisms often is that we don't have a high enough turnout, even though it's maybe 25–30%.
Interestingly, people really only took notice of the Iowa caucuses when Jimmy Carter used it to get a national platform. But that's also a great example of the purpose of the Iowa caucuses. He didn't even win. He came in after undecided voters. More people were unsure of who to vote for than for him. Of course, he rumped it through to the White House. The idea around the Iowa caucuses is that there are 3 tickets out of here. It's going to set the stage. What I've been told is it separates the contenders from the fakers, and so we'll find out who's really got the stamina to go the distance and who's put the time in on the ground here, talking to voters, meeting with them, looking them in the eye and listening to what they think the issues are.
So this might be the real thing out of these caucuses. We're not going to obviously have the winner declared, Annelise, but for some of the minor candidates trying to make an impression, if they can't get through, and make an impression here, particularly when the big contenders are caught up in a lot of ways in the impeachment process, well, then the writing's on the wall for them.
Absolutely, but the flip side is true too. People can come out of nowhere. We saw that with Barack Obama. He had a huge national presence at that point and was seen as a serious contender before then, but it was really when he came through in those caucuses that people started to see that he could make the distance to the White House. Even though there were those concerns that perhaps America wasn't ready for a black president, he certainly proved that wrong. And there is that idea that those smaller contenders will fall by the wayside, but they'll also choose who they throw their support behind. It does seem likely with the polling, with the people I've talked to on the ground, that Bernie Sanders will pull ahead, but we've seen in the past that doesn't always mean that it will mean a long-term success for him, but it could be the final nail in the coffin if he doesn't at this point. You're right, he has been held up in Washington with the impeachment inquiry, but good Lord, we've seen a lot of advertising. When you watch the news here, every single ad break is just full of political advertising. The last count I saw for the amount of money they've spent is $70 million. To put that in perspective, there's 3 million people in Iowa. That's an extraordinary amount of advertising. So they're certainly throwing everything they can at it, especially because it is a crowded field. There's no one obvious contender just yet.
There you go. Each person gets $23 of advertising. Annelise Nielsen, we better let you get back to a fireplace and a warm cup of something, hopefully. Thank you. We'll talk again soon.